Philip Bateman Bravo Charlie here at the Impact Investments Summit Asia Pacific. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Rosemary Addis. Rosemary, you've got quite a significant level of experience and positions that you hold. Could you care to share a few?
Sure, thanks, Philip. I am currently working with a range of organisations leading initiatives that help create positive impact. And I have been helping to build the field of impact investing and social innovation here in Australia and internationally. In all, I left my corporate career around 17 plus years ago and have since worked across community sector, in government, in state and federal level, and internationally in working out how we can drive more positive choices for people. Currently, I chair Impact Investing Australia, which I founded 6 years ago, and I'm a trustee of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, which has grown out of a G8 task force that was set up by David Cameron back in 2013 to see how can we catalyse more of this activity around the world.
And have you seen the conversation mature in that time?
It's really been quite phenomenal. I think that the pace of change is quite fast. And I say that in a relative sense because we can look at things and get frustrated and see that there's still such a long way to go to meet the objectives that we'd like to see to achieve, for example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which 17 global goals setting out targets for a more equitable, just and prosperous world. And we've made progress, but there is still a long way to go, and the targets are ambitious for 2030. So it's easy to look at in that context and say we've been doing this for a long time, in my case nearly 20 years, for some people longer, and we haven't moved all capital to be taking impact into account, and we haven't put in place things that really do help to people to overcome poverty and provide basic services in a lot of places. And that's true. But in relative terms, the pace of change is really quick. And so what I mean by that is if you look at things like our accounting systems and modern day accounting that we use, the systems of double entry bookkeeping were first invented 400 years ago. And that was when people stopped trying to add Roman numerals and actually started using Arabic numbers and decided that if you're going to do this double entry bookkeeping, you needed to keep inventories and you needed to be systematic about the way you kept track of things coming in and out of your business. And it's taken time to evolve the systems and practices. This field of impact is now accelerating at a great rate, and there's a number of drivers of that. And we don't want it to take 400 years, but it doesn't need to. And the great news is it doesn't need to, because we actually know how to do these things now. We know which of the developments in other fields, including in financial fields, made a difference. The piece we need to bring together with that is the social, and the part of the work ahead of us is to join up the people who know what works on the ground and the people in communities who know what they need, and the science that knows what the planet needs for us to conserve it and ensure its longer term health, and join that up with the people who have the resources so that we can accelerate that whole process.
I've seen corporate social responsibility, ESG goals, triple bottom line, which is giving way to the SDGs. And as social license to operate is coming up in a big way for large funds, where people start to demand more transparency and accountability in the space. And I was hearing last night, essentially what I've seen here is a really tight-knit community of people who've been working very hard to, under the auspice of impact investing, to carve out a niche of funds for good, capital for good. And as these large funds turn around and suddenly go, oh, we need a product to satisfy the requirements of all the angry folk in the street. What do you see as the challenges with integrating that large behemoth shift into this space to go, we got to be, greenwashing essentially, I think is a...
Well, so there's a lot in that question. So let me unpack it a little bit. First of all, we have seen an evolution. I would describe it as an evolution, and the evolution is in how we think about the relationship between social and environmental issues and the financial issues. And we have developed a system that overemphasises the financial, but that's relatively recent. If we come back to this perspective of history, that really only has been in about the last 4 decades.
Yeah.
You know, the modern theories of finance really only gained acceptance in the latter part of the 20th century. So we can decide to do things differently. So our system currently overemphasises the financial, and there have been various moves, as you've alluded to move us towards thinking about the interrelationship between the social and environmental and the different parts of society, the role of corporates, the role of government, the role of civil society. But to date, those have been trying to intersect or overlay or be a part of what people are doing, kind of as an add-on to. So we have our corporate business, and then here we do things, and the term, you know, we give back to the community, or we're trying to do things for the community, but it doesn't touch the heart of the business or the strategy. And so we can end up in a situation, even for philanthropy or for corporates, for example, where they might be doing some things which are genuinely good for the community, genuinely good for the environment, but it's a tiny percentage of their overall activity. And so if you were to think of that in more accounting-like terms, the net balance still has a lot of things which are not helpful. And the reporting that's grown up around that, the triple bottom line and other things, have been useful, but it's all developed in a way that is bespoke, kind of reflecting that it's been idiosyncratic approaches and a bit piecemeal in places, or classification after the fact of things that people are already doing to try to give us a story, or relate things they genuinely are doing that are good in their communities. But it hasn't been integrated in the way that we think about strategy and decision making. And so we're now in a situation where the importance of social and environmental issues is becoming increasingly pressing. There are a number of things we know that are driving that. The needs of our planet and the climate crisis that we find ourselves in, and the urgent need to start turning the curve on that. And we see the symptoms of the social issues coming out in various ways. Some of it through inequality, and we can see hotspots and examples all around the world. People's dissatisfaction with a climate that we've created in a whole range of countries because of this emphasis on financial, that says if I'm not getting more of the money, somehow I'm missing out, or it's unfair, and that we've created a large divide between people with wealth and people without wealth. But at the same time, we've also had some social issues that, however much progress we've made in technology, in the way that we understand science and human behaviours, we just haven't shifted the dial. In Australia, for example, those who have experienced deep disadvantage have not had a real improvement in outcomes through the whole of the 3 decades where we've had significant economic growth and continuous economic growth. And that's been reinforced by the Productivity Commission here. For those Australians who do it tough, they still do it tough, and their situation has not changed. So there's those different drivers that are really starting a different conversation now, and that when we look at government and philanthropy, they just don't have enough capital to address all of the issues. And in the financial markets, we've had trillions and trillions of dollars. There's literally about $7 trillion that change hands every single day in capital markets. And in total, even when you strip out the double counting along the way through aggregated mechanisms, there's still about $100 trillion of capital in the world. And we say that its job is just to make more money. And when you start to think about it in those terms, it really doesn't make sense. Why don't we have all of our resources working towards the kind of world that we want to see and that we want our kids to grow up in? And so we're seeing the pressures come to bear in a way that some of the corporate and finance sector are starting to understand that the impact they have is important. And we're also seeing an evolution in our thinking around what it means to be making decisions from a commercial and financial perspective, and what you really need to make progress on the social and environmental side. And so what we expect to see is that where we've had thinking that says we need to think about financial return, that in last century grew into, well, we understand that risk has an important dimension to this, and so we need to really develop our frameworks for risk-adjusted return, that the 21st century is saying, but there's still another vector that's always been there, which is about impact. And so it's really about risk return and impact. The other evolution that's come with that, through the work that's been led by people like Michelle Giddens, who you've met, and the team at the Impact Management Project, bringing together practitioners and stakeholders all around the world, is that we can see past the different labels and the different approaches to ESG, etc., to really come up with something that's quite simple. What are we, what kind of impact are we having? Because everything we do has an impact. And overall, are we avoiding doing harm? Are we benefiting stakeholders? Are we contributing solutions? The so-called ABC of impact. And if we're not doing any of those things, the contrast becomes quite stark. We either don't know, or we're doing things that are negative for our society and for the environment. Once you put it in those terms, it becomes much harder to defend a position where you say, I'm not going to take impact into account. That's not relevant to our success. And we're also seeing the theorists, including leading economists like Michael Porter and Mark Kramer and the team, who have given us propositions around shared values, saying actually the social and environmental is integral to success. We made a mistake when we left that out of our original thinking about competition theory and about the way that markets operate, who are now going a step further and saying even ESG being applied helps you work out who the laggards are in an industry, but doesn't help you work out how you're going to drive something that takes us closer to a world that has social progress, environmental conservation, and prosperity from an economic perspective. It doesn't actually help us work out where the new markets and new value creation opportunities are. And if we're going to talk about enabling the Sustainable Development Goals, then allowing a system that mainly focuses on classification of activities after they've happened isn't going to cut it. We need to be much more proactive and intentional from the front end.
And when we look at systems that have been developed, is it really because you get what you measure? And when we look at legacy economic systems or business reporting as normal, people are out there looking for, what did we do this quarter? It's essentially short-termism. We get what we measure. So you were talking about you had two weapons.
Yeah. So certainly you get what you measure, but also the measurement drives the incentivize, and so the incentives have been a bit skewed. The stealth weapons that I think about are, number one is stickability. Change takes a long time. Really embedding change at a broad level and changing the social constructs around which we've built a whole lot of our society and economy takes a long time. The good news about this is it's really about reminding people what they care about and reminding them that they don't have to separate what they do in the workplace from their values, or what they do in their investments from their values. And what we see is a huge release of energy as we remind people of that. People are quite clear about their values, and once they feel that it's okay to bring their whole self into their workplace or into the decisions about where their super is going, or to say, I care about my retirement income, but I also care about the kind of society that I retire into, then we find that there's an environment for operating that is much more open in terms of the possibilities, and so sticking with that, it is hard. People are used to doing things a certain way, but we've changed the way we get used to doing things over and over again as we've had more information. We used to think the world was flat. Data told us that was incorrect. We used to think that the sun revolved around the earth. Data told us that information was incorrect, and now data is telling us that impact matters. So number one is sticking with it. The second thing is governance, and governance is never seen as a sexy kind of issue, but it's actually really important. When you try and look up the definition of governance, it's really hard to find a definition that's not circular about the way things are governed. But when you drill beyond that, it's about how do decisions get made and whose voice gets heard in that process. If we're serious about putting impact into frame in the way we set objectives and goals, in how we then manage things and have transparency and accountability about the impacts that are being achieved, then we need to integrate that into our decision making. And it's a capability and a skill set and a set of experience the same as accounting or legal or subject matter or segment expertise that you would expect to have on your board or in your investment committee. And that helps to create the culture in the organisation as well, where people can put that into frame. And once you do that, what I say to people, it's like, I don't know if you've had the experience, you buy a red car and all of a sudden there are more red cars on the road than you ever imagined existed. And then you start to say, oh, I like that brand's shade of red, but I don't like that one over there. It's the same with impact. Once you put it into the system, then people start to see it and you can't unsee it. And so then they start asking different questions. If you embed it in the governance structures in putting a couple of different questions or some additional data into the materials that you're preparing for a decision-making body, for a board, for your next strategy meeting, and have that conversation, then you are creating an environment that is both permissive of having that, and we're starting to change those expectations around the conversation. And I have not yet seen an organisation where that doesn't create change. We saw Hester last night, Andrew Major, who has a very senior investment role in one of Australia's largest institutional investors, stand up and say once we started to try and understand impact, it helped us have a different conversation about a whole range of our aspects of our business. QBE, major multinational insurer based here in Australia, started a conversation about impact, found an opportunity to launch a product that differentiated them in the market, Premiums for Good, where people can opt for their premiums to go into a pool of investment that specifically seeks to have more positive impact. And they've had great success with that product, but it's also enabled them to start changing the conversation, because the people who are making decisions are now thinking about impact in a different way, and it's created feedback loops in their organisation. I'm yet to see a situation where we're including impact and into the governance and into the decision making and the process doesn't help to catalyse a process of change.
That's one of the things I'm so excited about with technology. And for instance, us being able to have this conversation and disseminate it, as people become empowered and can turn around and be like, wait, I can be responsible for my money. I can take control and actually say to the people who are governing it, hey, you're actually looking after my money. I want you to do this with it.
And I think when people have information, and technology is a great way for us to disseminate information. So, a really clear story of that in action is Dr. Bronwyn King. Some people in your audience may have met Bronwyn, a radiological oncologist at Peter Mac in Melbourne. So she's a cancer doctor. And she was having a baby, moving house. She had what she thought was a routine conversation with her financial advisor around her superannuation. And in the process, he said, I need to tell you, you've got some ethical options. And she asked for clarification, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, you can opt that your money won't go into things like mints or tobacco. And she said, hang on a second, are you telling me that unless I make an explicit decision, my money as a cancer doctor is going into tobacco, the thing that causes cancer in patients that I treat? And he said, well, most portfolios have diversification, all the things we talk about in terms of good financial management. And she said, no, stop. It is not okay for the money of people who work here to go into tobacco products. And she launched tobacco-free portfolios, or what's now known as that, and has convinced people to take trillions of dollars out of tobacco investment, because it's a very clear story. I'm a cancer doctor. I spend my life healing people with cancer. I don't want my money going into things that cause the problem that I spend my life trying to treat. And in the UK, they've really looked at this in terms of what would make it easier for people to invest aligned with their values, and they've now passed regulation that requires pension funds to disclose to people where their money is going. Information and the ability to disseminate information widely changes things. Once we know that everything has an impact and we have information about the impacts that we're having, people will vote with their feet. They will vote with their values. They will say, that's not what I want. So watch this space. Richard Curtis, the filmmaker who brought us Four Weddings and a Funeral, is working on a campaign, Make My Money Matter. And with the aid of technology, we hope that campaigns like that will get people asking different questions. And that's something so simple that people can do. What do markets respond to most? Demand. How do you create demand? You ask different questions.
Because your inaction has an impact. So why not make a positive action or a positive impact by choice? And what are you excited about? I know you're off to another summit next week, I believe it is.
I am off to the Global Steering Group's summit, and that will be taking place next week in Buenos Aires. I'm excited and very proud of the Global Steering Group team, who have had to pivot because we had planned for nearly 2 years that this summit would be in Chile and in Santiago, and all of the things that we're talking about, the inequality and the real issues people face in their lives, and the culmination of that in Chile in the unrest, has forced the difficult decision that we couldn't proceed in Santiago and have hundreds of people coming to within a block of where the riots were taking place. But Global Steering Group, being a group of people very committed to catalytic action and to standing in solidarity with people who are looking for better outcomes and a more prosperous world, we are not known to give up. And so we have regrouped, and the team has done an amazing job. And so the summit will go ahead with about 2/3 of the original participants in Buenos Aires starting on Monday. They've done that within a 3-week window. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the momentum that is growing from the work that we started with the task force in 2013, that we now have nearly 30 countries with national advisory boards established, bringing together cross-sector leaders. Harvard has written this up as a case study in cross-sector leadership, and these committed bodies of people within each country having a proactive conversation about how they're going to transform the way things get done to create better outcomes for people is really having a fantastic influence on governments. We've seen statements in the G7 and the G20 around innovative finance for more inclusive growth, and we're seeing even large multinationals that haven't generally engaged in the investment space saying we need to engage differently across sectors. And that's some of that focus is on mobilising private capital, but it's much deeper than that. So one of the things I'm working on with the United Nations Development Programme is then saying, well, we do need private capital. We also need authenticity around what is SDG enabling investment, and we need to ensure that money isn't just going into things on an ad hoc basis, but we're actually able to put a light on the areas where capital is really needed and the solutions that will work, and make sure that we're driving capital into opportunities. So I'm excited about that. And coming back to your point, Philip, about technology, what that's enabling us to do, for example, through UNDP, is take a whole lot of secondary data that doesn't get well used outside of small circles, and put that through a methodology that says what are the things that we know really important to meet the SDGs, but that also governments are interested in and that you can invest in to make a difference for people on the ground. Quick example of that is one of the things the early pilot work has highlighted in Brazil. It's that you've got the 4th largest food producer in the world, and 50% of grain is being lost between the point of production and the end point. 50%. At the same time that we have people burning down hectares and hectares of the Amazon to clear more land for farming. Now, there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, across supply chains, there's never one thing, but a key one that is is an investable proposition is around improving grain storage. Innovations and even just infrastructure that we know works from other settings to improve the storage so that farmers can get their grain to market, they can have more reliable incomes, and that we can fully utilise the food that's being produced. So I'm excited about our ability to shift all of those things. I'm excited about the progress that we're making in understanding and managing impact, and I'm really proud of the communities like this that come together to energise one another to continue to take that work forward.
And when you mentioned what you just mentioned about investing in grain storage and using that as an impact investment example, traditional investment vehicles, whilst they do look at triple bottom line for one of an acronym, they are seeking commensurate returns with standard investments. So do you see the impact sector actually stacking up in that regard? Is it more people need to commit capital because they believe in the good more than the returns they're going to get? Because I believe statutory bodies who are legally obligated to provide shareholder returns have to act in the best interest of the shareholders. So how do we get across that friction point?
So I don't see it as a friction point. I actually see it as an opportunity, and some of the leading economists in the world are telling us, like Michael Porter, that that's where the future of markets will lie, in unlocking demand in new areas and seeing people whose needs have not yet been served in a whole range of areas actually as new markets, and we've got companies like Leapfrog that are proving that proposition. The data so far, including analysis from Wharton and from Cambridge together with the Global Impact Investment Network, suggests there is not a necessary trade-off. In fact, that where people are putting a focus on alpha, at least in these early stages of the market, that there's actually potentially an impact alpha to be gained, because you think about it as rigor, you're examining additional dimensions of risk and opportunity in your investment set and in your activities. Also, I think we need to be conscious we are in a low interest rate environment that's likely to go on for some time. We have $12 trillion in the world currently in negative yield debt products. Right. And so it's actually an opportunity where we can do the R&D that's necessary, but we shouldn't assume that there will be a sacrifice in financial returns. But we do need to make some of the investments that are typical of any early market when you're proving something up, where we take some additional risk in the unknown. Doesn't mean it's actual risk, but it's the risk that people perceive when they don't yet understand a field of investment. That again is not something new. We've done it in biotech, we've done it in IT, we've done it in infrastructure. We know how to do this. And we heard Neil Gregory from the IFC yesterday saying that their analysis indicates that where you're talking about neutral risk investments, that they have no difference in performance across their portfolios, and they've been investing in not only in impactful areas, but also in less developed markets like African countries for many decades now, and they can say that with confidence across their portfolio.
And to jump in and have a go, I mean, I was speaking with Michelle yesterday, where she was mentioning Michelle Giddens from the English Family Foundation.
From Bridges
Fund Management.
Yeah.
Thank you. That investing in the future is the future of investing.
Absolutely, and that was that we think that that this dimension of impact is the next evolution. Our global chair, Sir Ronald Cohen, who some people know as the founder of Apex Partners, one of the most successful venture capital and private equity funds, but also co-founder of Bridges Funds Management, co-founder of Social Finance, co-founder of Big Society Capital. His view is that this is an evolution in our thinking about how markets and investment allocations operate, but it's a revolution in means, because once we can unlock the constraints we currently put on our capital in terms of where it goes, there are new opportunities out there, and there's also a whole lot of innovation to unleash in the areas where people are interested in driving new models to develop solutions. The other part of this conversation is that the way that we deliver services to communities and procure through governments is seriously broken, particularly in countries where we've had the welfare state. We absolutely need a strong safety net for people. There is no question about that in my mind. You measure a society by how it, how it engages with and takes care of the most vulnerable members. We're failing that test at the moment, and the way that we put funding into civil society and into things that help to drive solutions does not enable them to innovate, does not enable them to grow. And part of the reason I spend my time on this is somebody who's come from the private sector and the corporate world. Not only do I believe that we can integrate impact there, but I've also spent time driving social innovation to come up with solutions in terms of how we deal with social issues and on community sector boards. And I've seen time and time again, we can talk until we're blue in the face about solutions and working with communities. If we can't put resource there, then we will never get to scale. And those things are not antithetical to one another. As we see in places like this fantastic ingenuity that people have, often with robust business models, and we need to put more of our capital behind growing that. And Australia can and should play a huge role in this. We have great ingenuity here. We're leaders in R&D. This is our opportunity to refresh our skills in taking that to market, not only here in Australia, but in the countries around us where there's so much need and opportunity.
And for people who have gone, great, I'm in, got it, what do they need to do as a first step to get involved in impact investing?
So as an individual, look at where your money is and the decisions that you're making in purchasing, in investing. Ask your advisors different questions. At work, start asking questions about the impact that you're having. We've had fantastic presentations here about how issues like modern slavery that most of us would find abhorrent but can be embedded in supply chains. Start asking the questions and looking at where there are opportunities to influence in your workplace to put impact on the agenda and for innovation. In terms of engaging more broadly, be part of the areas where we need collective action to come up with the standards and frameworks. Be part of the conversation about how we start to bring those the developing standards and frameworks into our organisations. Put up your hand to pilot. Be a leader in terms of saying this is a conversation that we need to have, and advocate with our governments. Governments respond to what the constituents are asking for. We need to be much clearer and louder that a world that we can see social progress and environmental sustainability as well as economic prosperity matters to people, and that we need an enabling environment to do that.
And for people who might be thinking that everything's fine and we'll just wait for somebody else to do it, what would you say to them?
I think particularly in the cultural ethos of Australia, there's a tendency sometimes to go, well, they. And, one of the things that got me started down this path is a revelation that there is no they. I was a partner in a large law firm, and when I'd recently become a partner, I was taking a walk with a friend, and she was working in the firm, and she was saying they. And then she looked at me and she said, oh my God, you're they now. And and I thought, actually, I'm still me. And there is no they. There's only every single one of us. And some of us might be in positions where we have more decision-making or authority. Some of us might be working in community. Some of us might not have a job. Some of us are playing all kinds of different roles. But we all have agency. And so we need to both use our agency and give agency to others. Listen to what people are saying. And sometimes it seems overwhelming because systems get constructed around the way that people do things, but we can all do things that were within our grasp, and we never know who's listening, who's watching, and which acts, when you add them all up together, will take us to a tipping point. So don't sit back, be proactive, and be part of creating the world that you want to see.
Thank you for your work and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Phil.